KUCI 88.9 FM in Irvine. Standing by to join me is Ernest Gonzales. He's Associate Professor and Director of the MSW Program and the Center for Health and Aging Innovation at NYU. Welcome to the show.
Janine. Yeah, thanks. It's good to be with you.
Did I miss anything, or are you doing additional work as well during the pandemic?
That is sufficient. I could go into all of the other projects that I'm currently working on, but let's just stick with that.
Amazing. Well, I heard about you, as I mentioned, through the fellowship I'm in the midst of with the Age Boom Academy, and I love it. It's, as you know, with the Columbia School of Journalism.
Yeah.
And someone mentioned you, I believe it was Donna Butts from Generations United. And I looked at some of the things you're doing and I thought, this is right up, my alley, what I'm interested in, intergenerational strategies. But before we get into that, how did you become so passionate about what you do?
Well, I think it started at a very young age. My grandparents on my mother's side took care of me and my older brother. Mm-hmm. And every summer from pretty much the ages of 6 onward to about 14, 15, until I moved in with them permanently thereafter, it was a summer filled with adventure, filled with love. My parents were in Albuquerque and we were in El Paso. And coming from a very traditional Mexican family, I had at least 4 to 5 uncles at one living under the same roof in a 3-bedroom house. And, so the notion of like family and multi-generational household and living together and just challenging, working through the challenges of life, it really started with my grandparents at a really young age. And from there, I think it was because of them that I started to ask questions that were kind of sociological in nature, talking about employment dynamics and relationships with the boss, if you will.
Yeah.
Talking about racism, sexism. These were conversations that were normal while doing grilling and barbecuing on the weekends with my uncles and my grandparents. So I think it was because of them that I became interested in what I currently study now. And in fact, I dedicated my dissertation to my grandparents because it really was because of them that I knew what love felt like. And it was because of them that I could actually study. So I owe them a great deal of debt.
That is beautiful.
They were great grandparents.
There's something so unique and so special. I call it the grandparent effect, where that relationship is so different than with a parent.
Yeah.
So unique.
It really is. And my grandparents were disciplinarians as well, but they left that to my parents. And I remember the first bike I ever got was from my grandmother. And it was a dirt bike. And my brother and I just loved our bikes in the Albuquerque desert. And it's a very different relationship. And, I remember when I applied to the PhD, the first quote in the personal statement was respect your elders. And, from a very young age, my uncles were always correcting me with, it has to be like, sí, señor, sí, señora. It has to be this reverence. And when my uncles were around, there was definitely a hierarchical sort of like pay your respect. But when they weren't, my grandparents were friends, they're friendly and loving. And it was really great. Yeah.
Because you and I were talking, were you saying it at the age of 2? That's when, these minds.
Yeah. So a lot of our stereotype formations occur very young ages. In one area of research on gender, there is some pretty compelling research indicating that we have a very somewhat concrete, dogmatic approach to what male and female, boy and girl is. And as we continue to age, our firmness tightens up, but then it becomes a lot more fluid and dynamic by the age of 6. And by those ages, we start to question, why is it that boys only like certain color and girls and such? And I think, we don't have that level of sophisticated research in ageism and age, but I think it's compelling for us to at least think that at such a young age, we start to make assumptions of what people should be and shouldn't be doing just because of a socio-demographic characteristic.
Right. Yeah. It's been a really fascinating journey for me in the fellowship because I have learned how there's so much discrimination. And I didn't realize that college students, I know they experience a tremendous amount of loneliness before the pandemic. Obviously now it's more, intense. So there's loneliness, social isolation with college students, but then you have older adults. And when you bring them together, it is that grandparent effect I was talking about,
It can be, there's been so many intergenerational programs that I've evaluated, that have been part of, and all of them share a similar characteristic where the moment you just step in the room, there is a different type of energy. It's an energy of novelty, of excitement, of opportunity, of promise, and that's, it seems just to be a natural outcome to intergenerational programming when it's done really well. And so, yeah, that grandparenting effect, I think we just, as the only caveat that I would add is I've been trying to have intergenerational programmers problematize not just age, but also racism and perhaps sexism and ethnocentrism. And, we've done a lot of research and interventions on overcoming ageism, and I really am a strong advocate for all of that. But I think the 21st century is far more diverse than the previous centuries and the previous decades that we've lived in. And so as we're living longer, particularly the older demographic, the majority of them are white, but the younger generations are predominantly of color. Yeah. And how can you have a conversation and shape those conversations on not just ageism, but other forms of discrimination? And I think that's a really exciting area that we need to try to tackle in the 21st century.
That's a really interesting point, because different generations, different mindsets, different ways of looking at things, different lens. I can see why that would have its challenges.
Yeah, and I think there might actually be a common ground here. The majority of younger folks have a stronger orientation to social justice.
Yes.
But we can't lose the fact that baby boomers were right there at the forefront of women's rights, of racial ethnic minority inclusion, and so I think there's an opportunity for different generations, even though they're different, to still find common ground on social justice. And I think this is the time to do it if there's any.
Yes. It's so ironic. I just did an interview with Kim Snyder, who produced this amazing film called Us Kids, featuring some of the outstanding activists like Emma Gonzales, who now goes by X Gonzales. And it's outstanding. And we were talking about how, she grew up in the 60s. They're growing up in a different time, but there was a tremendous amount of respect and a bond between her as a filmmaker and a different way of communicating than if they were talking to parents. You know what I mean? And they could just really relate to one another because Kim experienced similar things in the 60s.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Maybe just sharing those lived experiences of oppression and discrimination. With the younger generations, not to patronize, but the younger generations are really hot to trot and have a discussion about microaggressions. But microaggressions, before they were ever a thing, we had major straight up segregation,
Right.
straight up discrimination within the workplace where, I remember my mom one time, she's a Mexican woman with a high school education. And when I was about 7 and 8, my father became disabled. He was a truck driver. And my mom was then shot into the workforce. Now, she will never call herself a feminist, but she felt a sense of liberation in that she could contribute to society through her work.
Okay.
And as she was applying for jobs, I remember she came home one day rather demoralized. And I asked how it went. And she said, well, I went, she was applying for a secretarial job. And she went in, and there was a white male who was interviewing her. And he asked, why she was wanting this job. And she told him, and he reviewed her resume, and essentially he said, well, ma'am, don't you think that you should be at home taking care of your kids?
Come on.
you
What'd
know,
she say?
yeah, well, she was stunned. She didn't even she couldn't even respond to that. So she took her resume and she left. And it was just like, she is trying to take care of her kids. She's trying to trying to get a job to bring bread and butter to the
Yeah.
table. Um,
The
but
guilt factor. Ugh.
yeah, exactly. But that's straight up like
Yeah.
in your face
Right.
sexism.
Exactly.
It's now it's so covert, but back then it was so overt, and people felt as though they could just get away with it. So
Yeah.
there's a lot for us to unpack on the different forms and experiences and perceptions of discrimination. Um, so maybe that's an opportunity for us to build on for intergenerational programs.
I think so. And as you mentioned, I think it really has to start early on in schools. I
Yeah.
mean, we adopted STEM and STEAM. I just feel like this has to be a conversation, whether you're talking about racism, sexism, ageism, early on in the curriculum.
Yeah, it's such a hard nut to crack. And I appreciate your passion for having a life stage, life course approach to undermining and ending ageism. I just launched a class at NYU called Ending Ageism.
I
And
saw that.
I have a specific task is for my students to pick a life stage for the intervention. And a lot of interventions really kind of start in college, some in undergrad, very few early on. And I think the reason why is because we haven't fully assessed the stages at where kids are at. And how do you think about, as opposed to gender and, ethnicity, race, especially race and ethnicity, those are rather static sort of characteristics to one's identity. I could imagine gender being dynamic and fluid. Definitely, there's a continuum there. But age is also very much a continuum. And it's not as though we're one singular age our entire life. So how do you kind of speak about this dynamic aspect of being human to a child about age? But anyway, I think it's possible, and we just have to meet the children where the children are at for the intervention. And it could be as simple as drawing together or reciting poetry together or
Mhm.
sing together,
Yes.
and measuring those outcomes. But I think it's totally possible.
So in your course, do you have these students really thinking as entrepreneurs, like how they would come up with intergenerational strategies?
We are the School of Social Work, so more often than not, they're thinking about not for profit organizations that could create some programs.
Mhm.
Um, so it's definitely entrepreneurial in that sense, but without the profit dimension to it. I do bring back, and it's just a course that we launched. I'd like to develop the course a little bit more, so then there's a budget that's attached to it. Simply
Yeah.
because it's not for profit doesn't mean that you could just exist on constantly getting grants. That's been very challenging in the not for profit industry. So, how do you kind of create an ongoing sustainable program through grants, but other funding mechanisms to end one of the most pernicious and accepted forms of discrimination yet, which is ageism?
Yeah.
So, that's the direction I want to go in.
That's wonderful. I mean, I actually looked at your website and I saw that you have that class. That's outstanding.
And I want to expand it. It's like, and in fact, I'm working with an undergrad right now who's pulling the literature on, okay, how have we overcome psychosocial prejudices on racism, on sexism, on ethnocentrism, on ageism. And I want to distill it to a way that we could create just a working theory of not just overcoming ageism, but also racism simultaneously. Right now, the literature and the interventions have been very siloed. It's just one ism at a time. And I think given just the excitement and also the sophisticated, this is Jack.
Oh, hello. Let me know.
So slowly but surely, we're going to be creating an intersectional approach to overcoming ism.
I think that's so important. I also love to write, so I'm writing screenplays. I've been writing short ones, and before the fellowship, I realized I love to write about intergenerational themes. So you have this troubled teen, and you have this older person, and how they connect in comedy or dramedy, and then I get the fellowship and I think, this is so important. I'm so glad I took this path because we need to see this in TV and film. And
yeah.
You know?
And be intentional about it. You know, I think intergenerational, multi-generational, it's a naturally occurring phenomenon. It's very easy just to get generations together.
Yes.
But how you bring them together to, you know, how do you elevate and make an ism salient? So then that is kind of that's in their mind, but not so much at the forefront that they're going to hold on to their pre-existing beliefs. Mm-hmm. Engage in that activity in which they're comfortable, and after the activity they have an aha moment like, I had an assumption that older adults could do X, Y, and Z, and now I know that that assumption is like could only do X, Y, Z, and now I have an assumption they could do much more than that.
Yes.
So it's that intentionality, I think, in the programming that's really important.
I had a friend of mine who used to live in New York, and he hosted a game show. His name was Sonny Fox, and he recently passed away. I think he lived to be about 95. And we became friends just over the phone. I picked up the phone. I wanted to ask about Wonderama that he hosted years ago. And we met for lunch. We remained friends. And he was always doing something. He was just amazing. He had such purpose and meaning in his life. And I find that what I'm seeing is when older adults and younger adults have purpose and meaning, it's that reason that gets them up out of bed in the morning and excites them. Right?
Yeah, it is. I focus on productive aging, which is a much of the emphasis is on creating opportunities to work, to volunteer, and to caregive, and across life, but specifically later in life. But there is a word of caution. You know, we live in a society that has very much values productivity, and I'm just reminded of like thinking about the resources that are necessary to be productive. And, as long as the individual feels as though there's a choice to have that drive, then it's not that they're not forced to do something.
Sure.
Even if it's just like peer, sort of like peer pressure. And just be cautious of I'm cautious of turning older adults into lemons, right? So you have a tremendous amount of resources and experience, but let's use it, use it only if they want to.
Yeah,
and otherwise, go experience retirement and leisure if that is a choice, and if that is.
There he is. Sorry, did you say that's a boy cat?
Yeah, Jack. Yeah. This guy is so hungry. Now that we're working at home all the time, I think he too has gained weight. And
funny.
Here's our voice. He'll just come down and have us love him, and then
so cute.
Demanding some food pretty soon.
Amazing. Well, I don't want to keep you so much longer, but where can people find out more about you and some of your research and what you do?
At our website, let me just pull it up. Let's see, it's NYU CHAI.org.
Okay.
And we post a lot of like our current studies on there. They're welcome to get in touch with me through that email that is listed. And I'm certainly around, for any guidance or support, just to troubleshoot and brainstorm. I'm happy to do that as well.
What is the Aging Incubator, by the way?
That was launched, I believe, in 2017, 2018. And it was really from our provost and our president who identified 3 cross-cutting themes for the university to focus on. Inequality, urban affairs, and aging were the 3. And the provost put some money behind it, where she wanted to support researchers across disciplines to focus on one particular theme. And so we have that's the Aging Incubator, where it's in social work and nursing and aging and architecture and business and sociology, you name it. And we have a couple of faculty across the university who every now and then come together and talk about what their research projects are. We mentor and support students from the undergrad all the way to the PhD and postdoc levels, all to focus on aging. And so that's what the Aging Incubator is. It's to develop more knowledge on healthy, productive aging.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Janine, for sure, anytime. And best of luck with it all.
Thank you.